What if I told you that everything you believed about the ideals of medieval combat became obsolete in a single day? For centuries, a knight's valor and personal bravery, his heavy armor and trusty steed, were considered the main forces determining the outcome of any battle. The art of war was a dance of steel and discipline, where man stood at the center of everything, being the main weapon and defense. But then tools appeared on the battlefield that respected neither rank, valor, nor centuries-old traditions. These soulless machines could stop the attack of even the bravest knight before he could even get close to the enemy. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how one short but devastating battle proved that the future belongs not to the man in shining armor, but to the engineer with a supply of gunpowder. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how the longest and seemingly endless war in history ended? By 1453, the 100 Years' War, the grueling conflict between England and France that had lasted for over a century, was coming to its logical conclusion. After a miraculous revival under the banner of Joan of Arc and the methodical reforms of Charles VII, the French crown gradually reclaimed all its lost territories. The English, torn apart by internal strife and weakened by defeats, held on to only one last major stronghold, the Duchy of Aquitaine, centered on the famous city of Bordeaux. For 300 years, this region had been considered an integral part of English possessions and was for many inhabitants their homeland, not just conquered land. In the summer of 1453, the French army under the command of Jean Bureau began the siege of Castillon, a small but strategically important town on the Dordogne River. It was a routine, methodical operation, seemingly no different from dozens of other sieges undertaken by the French in recent years. They were in no hurry, knowing that time was on their side, and that English reinforcements would either not arrive or arrive too late. The French king, Charles VII, sought to end the war not with a loud, risky battle, but with a series of well-planned, guaranteed victories. However, the inhabitants of Bordeaux and the surrounding lands, deeply loyal to the English crown, were in despair at such a slow decline. They sent messages to England begging for help, promising to rise up against the French if only they would send them a worthy leader. The English court, led by the young and weak King Henry VI, was in chaos, but even there they understood that the loss of Bordeaux would be a final humiliation and lead to a collapse of prestige. This last request for help was seen as a chance to save honor and perhaps delay civil war. In response to these desperate pleas, England's most legendary, and in fact only remaining great commander, the 80-year-old John Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, was sent. His name was a symbol of old English valor. His reputation in England was almost mythical, and in France, where he was nicknamed the English Achilles, he inspired a mixture of fear and respect. Sending Talbot, despite his advanced age, was not so much a military gesture as a political and psychological one. It was an attempt to breathe life into the dying resistance. Talbot arrived in Bordeaux with a relatively small force, but his appearance sparked a real explosion of enthusiasm among the Aquitanians, who saw him as their savior. His strategy was to launch an immediate, aggressive offensive to catch the French off guard before they could firmly establish themselves in Aquitaine. He believed that a decisive, bold strike could change the course of the entire campaign, as it had in his prime when he led knights into battle. For the French command, the news of Talbot's arrival was alarming, but not frightening. They knew his reputation, but they were also aware of his age and his inevitable tendency to use outdated, albeit heroic, tactics. Armed with new technology and methodical discipline, the French were confident of their superiority and waited for the legend of the old world to walk into their modern trap. Castillon became the focus of all this drama. The small river and low hills surrounding it were the perfect place for the French to deploy their main new trump card. The battle everyone was waiting for was to be not just a battle for the city, but the final duel between two military eras. It was the last chapter in a great story, and all participants felt the significance of the moment, without even suspecting how radically the art of war would change on this small field. John Talbot believed in the power of his knightly blow, while Jean Bureau believed in science, mathematics, and gunpowder. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think about the role of individuals in history? Can one person, such as Talbot, really change the outcome of a century-long war, or is technological progress inevitable? Write about it in the comments. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next dive into the mysteries of history. I will reveal the best-kept secret of that time. Talbot was not just a military leader. He was the living embodiment of the passing Middle Ages, its ideals, and his unshakable belief in knightly valor. At 80 years of age, he retained the fierce energy and determination that made him a legend in his youth, but his military thinking remained firmly rooted in the traditions of the past. For him, war was a matter of personal honor, skill with a sword, and the ability to inspire his men to bold attacks rather than the dull science of calculations and sieges. His name alone was worth an army, and his enemies knew that as long as Talbot was on the field, victory could not be guaranteed. Talbot spent most of his life in France, fighting for the interests of the English crown, surviving captivity and numerous triumphs, which ultimately led him to the status of an almost mythological hero. He was the last of a galaxy of great English commanders whose victories, such as Agincourt, once shook the whole of Europe and secured England's possession of half of France. Everyone expected him to follow tradition and employ his favorite tactics: rapid maneuvers, flanking maneuvers, and a crushing blow from heavy cavalry. Upon arriving in Bordeaux, he immediately took action, abandoning the caution that his age and limited resources demanded. Talbot could not afford a long, grueling campaign and knew that he needed a quick, decisive victory to consolidate the English presence. He gathered all those who were ready to fight, including the local Aquitanians, who were inspired by his presence and eager for liberation from French rule. His first move was a brilliant and unexpected capture of the town of Libourne, located near Castillon. This daring operation was carried out so quickly that the French garrison was caught off guard and did not have time to put up serious resistance. The success at Libourne reinforced the belief in Talbot's invincibility and further boosted his own self-confidence, leading him to believe that the French still feared his name. Talbot believed in the principle that the greater the risk, the greater the reward, and he despised slowness and cowardly defense, considering them the lot of weak commanders. This belief and his legendary status, unfortunately, blinded him to the radical changes that had taken place in the French army. He did not take French artillery seriously, believing that cannons remained slow, inaccurate, and cumbersome siege weapons that were no match for the onslaught of determined cavalry. His views were typical of the entire old military elite. Cannons were dirty and unchivalrous weapons that could not compare to the strength of a man in armor. He could not understand that the French master artilleryman Jean Bureau had revolutionized artillery, transforming it from a siege weapon into a mobile and deadly field weapon. For Talbot, cannons were simply an annoying nuisance to be circumvented or ignored, rather than a major factor on the battlefield. Thus, Talbot set out for Castillon, carrying not only the hopes of England, but also the entire old military worldview, which was doomed. He was ready to fight as they had done at Crécy and Poitiers, relying on the force of impact and personal valor, but his opponent was already preparing to fight by completely new rules, written with the help of gunpowder. He was the last hero to go into battle, which did not require heroes, but rather cold-blooded calculations and engineering skills. He led his men not just into battle, but into a final dance on the ruins of the feudal world. His fate in this battle was to become a metaphor for the end of an era when personal skill gave way to technology. What do you think could cause a veteran who had never known defeat to make the most fatal mistake of his life? Watch the video to the end, and in the next chapter you will learn how an unassuming French engineer set a trap that changed the rules of combat forever. Want to know the secret that changed the course of the war and made the 100 Years' War the final chapter for knightly combat? The answer lies in the person of Jean Bureau, who was neither a knight nor a commander, but a simple yet brilliant artillery master whose name should be ranked among the greatest innovators in history. This man saw gunpowder weapons not as a rare curiosity, but as the foundation of a new army capable of breaking the power that had been considered invincible for centuries. His understanding of the mechanisms, calculations, and capabilities of metal weapons allowed him to propose an approach to warfare that was revolutionary for its time. Jean Bureau and his brother Gaspard came from a family of Parisian merchants and possessed a deep knowledge of mathematics, engineering, and logistics, which they transformed into a force that changed armies. They did not hold knightly titles and did not participate in combat tournaments, but it was their ability to plan, calculate distances, and take into account the properties of metal that made them rare specialists. They applied this knowledge to create an unprecedented artillery army that did not rely on chaos, but on precision, discipline, and technical sophistication. Their reforms changed the very nature of warfare. Their reforms consisted not simply of increasing the number of cannons, but of creating a standardized mobile system that was fully integrated into the field army. Before them, artillery was seen as a cumbersome addition to sieges, but the Bureau brothers understood that, with the right organization, it could work alongside the infantry and cover it with fire. This opened up enormous tactical possibilities. The new artillery army could not only destroy walls, but also repel attacks against cavalry, which had previously been considered almost impossible. The Bureau brothers standardized the calibers of their guns, which made it easier to produce and transport ammunition, eliminating the chaos that usually reigned in medieval artillery. Guns built to a single design were easier to repair, quicker to maintain, and required fewer complex attachments. This crucial innovation made it possible to form the first artillery units that operated as a single mechanism. Standardization became the basis for increased accuracy and effectiveness of firing. They developed new, lighter, and more durable gun carriages that could be quickly moved across the battlefield and set up in firing position within hours rather than days. Previously, artillery had been static, but now it could change positions, support an offensive, or reinforce defenses where necessary. This was a huge leap from siege engines, useless outside fortresses, to mobile weapons capable of determining the outcome of a battle. Such flexibility gave the French a clear advantage. Over time, the Bureau brothers' guns became part of an overall tactical plan rather than an isolated element. Gun crews were trained to work together, knew their tasks, and could work under pressure. As a result, artillery ceased to be a slow and unreliable tool and became a sophisticated force that could be controlled. The infantry and crossbowmen began to work in conjunction with the gunners, creating a unified combat system where each element reinforced the other. Their greatest achievement was the transformation of artillery from an auxiliary tool into a key element of tactics, and this principle was fully demonstrated on the battlefield at Castillon. Bureau did not intend to attack Talbot. He planned to lure him into a carefully prepared artillery camp, which became a deadly trap for the English. He understood that the enemy was accustomed to nightly attacks and therefore did not expect to encounter a wall of fire. The plan was designed so that the enemy would face not knights, but a force that could not be resisted. It was not just a position, but an engineering structure designed to make the most effective use of the destructive power of gunpowder against manpower and cavalry. The French worked quickly and precisely, using the knowledge they had accumulated over years of testing. The camp included fortifications, shelters, and pre-calculated points for placing cannons so that each could operate without interference. Engineering ingenuity became the main weapon of the French. The French camp was set up on a small plateau near Castillon, bordered on one side by a river and on the other by a stream and forest, making it difficult to bypass. This location left the English with no opportunity to maneuver in a way that would reduce the effectiveness of the fire. Natural obstacles became part of the defense, making the camp even stronger. All this was thought out in advance, which highlights the engineering skills of the brothers. Around the entire perimeter, they dug deep ditches and built high earthen ramparts, turning the position into an impregnable bastion in just a few days of work. Earthen fortifications withstood cannonballs better than stone walls and did not collapse from their own vibrations. Such structures protected not only the soldiers but also the guns, allowing them to fire accurately for longer. This was a rare example of how earthworks could determine the outcome of a battle. These fortifications were not only a defense, but also ideal firing points, protecting the crews from arrows and stray shots. From the height of the ramparts, the artillerymen could control the approaches and safely change positions. Even if the enemy approached, they came under crossfire, which destroyed their ranks before they could engage in close combat. This created conditions in which a nightly attack was pointless. The most important thing was the placement of the cannons, which were located at strategically important points on the ramparts and corners of the camp, creating crossfire and completely covering the attack routes. Bureau knew how to calculate the angles of fire and the distances between the guns so that their sectors overlapped. This allowed for continuous fire and deprived the enemy of the opportunity to approach stealthily. Each cannon was part of an overall plan. Bureau used not only large siege guns, but also numerous light culverins designed to combat infantry and cavalry. These guns had a high rate of fire and could hit targets approaching the ramparts. Their fire was deadly for knights, whose heavy armor was insufficient protection. This combination of heavy and light artillery made the French position truly impregnable. The French artillery park at Castillon numbered about 300 guns, which was unprecedented for a battle of that time. Each gun had a supply of ammunition and a trained crew that followed clear instructions. The firing was almost continuous, creating noise and impact that demoralized the enemy. All this made the French artillery a force comparable to the new era of warfare. If you think this little-known fact about the French army deserves attention, don't forget to like this video. It helps us find even more unique historical details. What if I showed you a time machine that would transport you to the battlefield and allow you to witness a fatal mistake made by a great commander? After the capture of Libourne, John Talbot received information that the French army had begun a methodical siege of Castillon. Deciding that he had to act immediately, before the French had time to fortify their position, he decided on a rapid march, which was his first fatal mistake. He underestimated the speed with which Jean Bureau could erect his earthworks and organize artillery positions, relying on old ideas about the slowness of siege operations. Moving with the main part of his forces, mainly cavalry units, Talbot reached the outskirts of Castillon early in the morning of July 20th, 1453, long before the infantry arrived. Tired but inspired by the presence of their legendary commander, the English and Aquitaine warriors were ready for battle, but did not yet have a complete picture of what awaited them. Speed was their only advantage, and Talbot, fearing to lose the element of surprise, decided not to wait for the straggling infantry. The first reports he received from his scouts were alarming, but incomplete. The French were hastily retreating from the city, abandoning their camp. This information turned out to be partially true. Some of the French troops had indeed left the city limits to take up their positions in a prepared artillery camp on the plateau. But it was not a retreat. However, rumors of panic and retreat among the French spread through the English camp, instantly inspiring Talbot to launch a decisive, immediate attack. He saw this as a sign of weakness, confirmation that the name Talbot still struck terror into the enemy, and decided to seize the moment without conducting detailed reconnaissance of the area. His experience told him that indecision in such a situation was tantamount to defeat, and he was confident that a swift cavalry attack would disperse the disorganized enemy. He could not have imagined that all this commotion was part of Jean Bureau's ingenious plan to lure him into a prepared position. In addition, Talbot had received false information that morning that the French had abandoned their camp, which was probably the last straw in his decision to attack immediately. It is believed that this message was either transmitted due to an error in intelligence or even deliberately planted by the French side to provoke a hasty attack. In any case, the legendary commander believed what he wanted to believe. His enemy was fleeing, and victory was near. He did not listen to the cautious advice of his younger officers, who insisted on waiting for the infantry and conducting thorough reconnaissance of the area in front of the artillery camp. Talbot, being a man of the old school, believed that honor and the speed of the attack were more important than caution and mathematical calculations. He ordered his cavalry units to prepare to attack the camp, which he believed to be empty and disorganized. His fatal haste was a direct consequence of his great past. He was accustomed to winning through audacity. He did not know that behind the earthen ramparts, it was not a medieval army that awaited him, but a carefully constructed modern machine of death that would leave his knights no chance. He drove his men forward, straight into a deadly trap that had been prepared in advance. Did Talbot have even a single chance of success at that moment, despite the obvious risk? In the next chapter, we will see what an impregnable fortress the French built in just a few days, and why it became the grave of the old knighthood. On a small plateau, where Jean Bureau had positioned his main forces, there was not just a defensive position, but a real field fortress of a new type, a cutting-edge example of 15th century military engineering. The location was chosen with extreme care. The elevation provided natural protection from flank attacks, allowed for the secure placement of artillery, and controlled all approaches to the French camp. From here, there was a wide view of the valley, which gave the French a decisive advantage in long-range fire. French soldiers, workers, and engineers worked without sleep or rest, transforming an ordinary hill into a carefully fortified bastion of earth, wood, and baskets filled with soil, gabions. Every moat, every embankment, every platform for artillery was calculated in advance, as if on a drawing board. Jean Bureau, one of the most talented artillerymen of his time, personally inspected the positions, checking every meter of the fortifications. He understood that the strength of his army lay not in numbers, but in the correct use of weapons that changed the face of war. In the center of the camp, protected on all sides, was the main artillery battery, the heart of the entire position. Here stood the heaviest guns, long-range bombards and culverins, their barrels glinting coldly in the sun. Infantry units were positioned in a semicircle around the battery, followed by cavalry and reserves hidden behind a second row of ramparts. Everything was constructed so that even in the event of a breakthrough, the attackers would come under crossfire and lose their formation. The camp was shaped like a perfect semicircle, with the open part facing the direction from which John Talbot's English army was expected to approach. It was in this front sector that the Bureau placed the most deadly weapons, heavy cannons, and batteries of field culverins. Their barrels were aimed at a suitable field, carefully cleared of trees and cover so that the English would have nowhere to hide. The ditches in front of the camp were dug by hand and were almost geometrically perfect. They were wide and deep enough to stop even the most determined knights. The English cavalry, renowned for its strength and momentum, was forced to slow down as it crossed this obstacle course, becoming an easy target for artillery. Bureau deliberately disrupted the usual rhythm of medieval battle. Instead of a chaotic clash, he forced the enemy to pass through a death zone, an area covered by dozens of barrels. The earthen redoubts were a model of military engineering of their time. They not only protected the artillerymen from arrows and crossbow bolts, but also created stable platforms for the guns, ensuring accuracy of fire. Each gun had its own sector, and the distance between them was calculated so that the fire covered the entire possible front of attack. Culverins, light but deadly cannons, stood at the forefront, ready to fire grapeshot and cannonballs at the advancing infantry and knights. Their continuous fire was intended to destroy the enemy long before they reached the French positions. Jean Bureau also took care of logistics, which was often the Achilles heel of medieval armies. Wide wooden paths were laid inside the camp, along which carts carrying gunpowder, shells, and supplies could easily move. Separate areas were designated for quick repairs to the guns and replacement of barrels in case of overheating. Everything was organized so that the artillery could fire without interruption for as long as possible. Significant reserves of infantry and French cavalry were located in the rear, but their task was purely auxiliary. The Bureau had no intention of engaging in close combat. That was a relic of the past. The time of knightly attacks was over. Its artillery had to do everything: destroy the English advance before they reached the ramparts, and the cavalry had only to finish off those who were fleeing. The Castillon camp was a revolution in military art. It was the first example in history of a field artillery fortress, created not for the defense of a city, but specifically for victory in open combat. It was a testing ground where medieval tactics finally collided with the era of firearms and lost. Jean Bureau knew that Talbot, the undefeated hero of hundreds of English battles, trusted in knightly combat and frontal attacks. The French were confident that he would not be able to abandon his usual tactics, and they were ready. The field in front of the camp became a deadly trap designed to kill the English before they could even get close to the French lines. Everything, from the angle of the cannons to the depth of the moats, was calculated to destroy the attackers as quickly as possible. This was not just a camp, it was a death machine, a carefully constructed mechanism designed to destroy the old world of chivalry and show Europe that from now on, the battlefield belonged to those who possessed gunpowder, engineering, and cold calculation. Guess what happened next after Talbot believed the false rumors of the French retreat? Talbot's decision to attack immediately was made in a feverish rush that was completely incompatible with the need for detailed reconnaissance and analysis of the terrain. Early in the morning of July 20th, he sent a small reconnaissance party ahead to make sure the French were not in the city, and this party found only a small number of soldiers hastily leaving Castillon. This picture only reinforced his conviction that the French army was in a state of complete disorder and panic, which prompted him to take the final, fateful step. When he arrived at the city with his main forces, his attention was drawn not so much to Castillon itself as to the French camp on the plateau, which, according to his information, was also supposed to be empty. Talbot, however, saw that the camp was occupied, but received a new, even more fatal rumor, which finally prompted him to take action. He was told that French soldiers were hastily leaving the camp because of some disturbance, which, as it turned out, was caused by shepherds fleeing from the French cavalry. Some of the shepherds, fleeing from French patrols, abandoned their horses and donkeys in the forest, and English scouts, hearing the noise and shouting from afar, mistook it for the beginning of a disorderly retreat by the French. This mistake, based on poor visibility and excessive haste, cost Talbot and his knights their lives, as he interpreted the noise as a call to immediate action. He was convinced that panic had seized the enemy camp, and that a decisive strike would defeat the French before they could recover. Talbot, without wasting a minute, gave the order for an immediate attack, throwing his cavalry into a frontal assault on the fortified camp, which he believed to be disorganized. He did not wait for his infantry and archers to arrive, who could have provided support and covered his flanks, relying solely on the striking power of his cavalry. It was a decision made not by reason, but by old knightly pride, which could not pass up what seemed to be such an easy victory. The French command, observing the hasty and poorly organized advance of the English, could not believe their luck. Talbot himself, of his own volition, was leading his best forces straight into a pre-prepared, deadly trap. Jean Bureau, a genius of calculation and patience, was simply waiting for this moment to prove the superiority of his new military art. He ordered his artillery crews to take up positions and wait for the command to open fire. The English cavalry, moving across rough terrain, quickly lost their formation, and their speed, which should have been an advantage, only added to the disorganization. The knights, confident in their personal valor, could not imagine that their attack would be stopped not by another knight, but by an invisible force waiting for them behind an earthen rampart. Could the English army have avoided its tragic fate by stopping in the morning? In the next chapter, you will learn what happened when John Talbot decided that the time had come for a final decisive strike. Finally, around noon, John Talbot's English cavalry reached the approaches to the French camp, where they were met by a silence that was ominous and alarming. The knights dismounted to negotiate the difficult terrain in front of the ramparts and prepare for the final attack, as required by medieval combat tradition. They were confident that they would quickly overcome the earthen fortifications and engage in close combat, where their valor and steel defenses would prevail over the French infantry. The knights, clutching their swords, began to methodically line up for the attack, unaware that every second spent lining up was bringing them closer to disaster. Talbot, standing at the head of his men, probably felt the rush of old knightly fighting spirit for the last time in his life as he led his last, most loyal forces into battle. He gave the order to attack the ramparts, hoping that the suddenness and determination of his assault would break the French defenses. With cries that mixed fatigue, bravery, and despair, the English knights moved forward, overcoming the last barrier between themselves and the enemy. It was a classic, straightforward knightly attack that had brought victory to English arms for centuries, but the battlefield had changed. At that moment, Jean Bureau gave the signal, and the silence was suddenly broken by the deafening roar of hundreds of cannons mounted on the ramparts of the French camp. It was the first example in history of massive artillery fire in a field battle directed against human forces. A barrage of cannonballs and grape shot rained down on the English knights, so dense and unexpected that it instantly threw the advancing ranks into chaos. The firing was at close range, and the cannonballs pierced even the best European armor, while the grape shot literally swept away entire groups of dismounted knights. The artillery, previously slow and inaccurate, now operated with terrifying efficiency, firing again and again, not even giving the attackers a chance to regroup. The effect was not only physical, but also psychological. This thunder, smoke, and instant invisible death were something that medieval warriors had never encountered before. The English, who had no experience of facing such dense fire, were in complete disarray, and their formation was instantly broken. Horses, frightened by the roar, bolted and fell, and the knights themselves, hampered by heavy armor, became easy targets for French gunners. They could not even understand where the fire was coming from, as the cannons were skillfully hidden behind earthen ramparts, making the enemy invisible and invulnerable. Some of the knights, having nevertheless reached the moats, tried to climb the ramparts, but there they were met by French archers and infantrymen, who easily finished off those who had survived the artillery barrage. The attack, which was supposed to be a triumph for knighthood, turned into a harsh and methodical beating, where personal valor was meaningless. Jean Bureau coolly proved that a well-aimed cannon hidden behind earthworks was worth a whole squadron of the bravest knights. Jean Bureau's massive artillery fire continued unabated, turning the approaches to the French camp into a bloody meat grinder from which there was no escape. Each cannon operated with unprecedented speed and accuracy, and the artillery crews, trained like professional soldiers, worked in a coordinated and methodical manner. Gunpowder smoke blanketed the field, creating a surreal picture of chaos and invisible death that crushed what remained of the English will to resist. English soldiers, who did not even have time to engage in close combat, fell by the dozens, unable to defend themselves or fight back. The heavy armor that had protected knights from arrows and swords for centuries now became their curse. It prevented them from moving quickly, leaving the firing zone or finding cover. A knight who fell under fire was unable to get up without help, and French artillerymen, seeing the ineffectiveness of conventional fire, switched to grape shot, which was specially designed to destroy manpower. The grape shot scattered into hundreds of small fragments, hitting several people at once and leaving no chance of survival. The cavalry, which was supposed to be Talbot's striking force, was completely demoralized and unable to regain its formation. Many horsemen, seeing their comrades and horses fall from invisible blows, began to flee, trying to leave the deadly zone of fire. But it was too late. French artillery fired on the retreating troops, turning their retreat into a full-scale flight and sowing panic in the rear. Jean Bureau, observing the results of his engineering and tactical genius, had no doubts. His method had worked perfectly, proving that war had forever escaped the control of individual valor. He had created a system where victory was guaranteed by technology and competent calculation, rather than luck or heroism on the battlefield. It was a victory of science over tradition, which finally established a new era of military art in Europe. The approaching English infantry, which was supposed to support the knights, saw only a picture of complete defeat and retreat, and they did not have the courage to engage in battle against an invisible enemy. The French infantry and cavalry, who were waiting in reserve, did not even have time to take full part in the battle. Their role was reduced to pursuing and capturing the remnants of the defeated English forces. The battle was won in just a few hours, and its outcome was decided solely by artillery. Castillon became a symbol of the end of medieval warfare, showing that walls and armor were no longer reliable defenses. In Europe, where knighthood was the foundation of social and military structure, this lesson was received with shock and horror. Cannons became the new king of the battlefield, and no future commander could ignore their presence. John Talbot himself, despite the horror of the defeat before his eyes, continued to fight with insane, almost superhuman courage, trying to inspire his men, hold the crumbling ranks, and regain some semblance of control over the situation. He understood that the battle was catastrophically lost, but duty, honor, and the habit of being the first to attack prevented him from taking a step back. Talbot was the embodiment of the old world, the old age of chivalry, for which retreat meant shame, and death was the natural end of a warrior's life. Even when his army was already turning into a shapeless heap of lifeless bodies, broken spears, and twisted metal, he remained where it was hardest, like a living shield, like the last bastion of spirit that the English were accustomed to seeing in their legendary commander. He tried to gather around him the remnants of his most loyal warriors, those who were still standing, despite their broken shields, pierced armor, and horses fallen under artillery fire. In this chaos, where the air was thick with smoke, blood, and gunpowder, Talbot still tried to give orders, pointing his sword in the direction where the line should be held. His voice, cracked with tension, still rang out across the field, although few were able to hear his words amid the roar of cannons and the cries of the wounded. But his fate, like that of his army, was tragic and long since sealed. In the thick of battle, when, as was his habit, he rushed to where the fire was heaviest, he was struck by a direct shot from a French culverin. The cannonball struck his armor with terrifying force. It did not pierce the hardened steel. The skill of the armorers saved his life for a few moments longer, but the powerful impact broke his leg and threw the great commander from his saddle. The legendary English Achilles, whose bravery inspired fear even in his enemies, found himself helpless, weighed down by the weight of his own armor, as if caught in a trap. But even lying on the ground, stunned by the blow, he did not give up. He tried to get up, leaning on his sword, but the pain was breaking his body, and his legs would not obey him. Shells continued to fall nearby, the earth shook, and it seemed that nature itself had turned against the once invincible commander. After his fall, French infantrymen rushed to the place where he lay. They surrounded him like predators surrounding a hunted animal. According to legend, a legend proudly repeated by the French and painfully remembered by the English, one of the soldiers recognized him by the coat of arms on his cloak and finished him off with an axe blow, ending the long, glorious and bloody life of the great commander. Thus fell the last bastion of the English army, a symbol of steadfastness, a man whose name had struck terror into the hearts of his enemies for decades. Talbot's death was not just the loss of a commander for the English. It was the symbolic end of an entire era when a commander led his troops from the front, relying on honor, personal valor, and the steel of his sword. As soon as news of his fall spread across the field, the last remnants of the English army turned into a crowd of people driven mad by fear. They fled in disorder, pursued by artillery volleys and French cavalry, which seemed to have been waiting for this moment to sweep them from the field, leaving them no chance of escape. The English losses were not just great, they were monstrous, catastrophic. The French lost very little, mainly from accidental arrows and rare lucky strikes. Several thousand English soldiers remained lying on the field of Castillon, and among the dead were almost the entire top command and the cream of the Aquitaine knighthood. Bureau's artillery inflicted destruction unlike anything seen before in European warfare. The Battle of Castillon was the most crushing defeat of the English in the entire history of the 100 Years' War, and one of the most one-sided defeats in medieval Europe. When news of John Talbot's death reached England, the country was gripped by shock and despair. He was a legend, a hero, the last hope for holding French lands. His death destroyed that hope, leaving only emptiness and the realization that the era of English claims to France was over once and for all. Just a few weeks after the tragedy on the field of Castillon, Bordeaux, deprived of its staunch defender, surrendered to the French. Thus ended 400 years of English history in Aquitaine, and with it, an entire era of knightly warfare. The Battle of Castillon marked the definitive end of the 100 Years' War, which had lasted 116 years and changed the political map of Europe. With the fall of Bordeaux and the death of Talbot, the English lost all their continental possessions except the port of Calais, resigning themselves forever to the fact that their kingdom was an island state. The defeat at Castillon served as a catalyst for the start of the War of the Roses in England itself, as the military disaster finally undermined the authority and legitimacy of King Henry VI. But the most important historical significance of this battle was not political, but military. Castillon forever changed the rules of warfare, proving the superiority of artillery over cavalry and fortified positions. Jean Bureau demonstrated that field artillery was capable not only of supporting the infantry, but also of winning battles on its own, destroying the enemy at a distance before they could offer any resistance. Knights, the symbol of medieval military art, proved completely powerless in the face of gunpowder fire. After Castillon, European monarchs and commanders began to invest heavily in the development of their own artillery, realizing that in the new war, only those who could control the battlefield from a distance would survive and win. Heavy knightly armor, which cost a fortune and required years of training, gradually fell out of use because it could not protect against cannonballs and only restricted movement. The emphasis shifted from individual valor to discipline, mass mobilization, and technology. This battle marked the birth of modern military engineering and logistics, as the Bureau's success depended not on bravery, but on precise calculations, standardization, and efficient ammunition supply. The army ceased to be a collection of feudal militias and began to transform into a professional, disciplined organization based on science and technology. The feudal world, with its hierarchy based on the knightly class, received a fatal blow, and centralized nation-states began to form on the ruins of the old order. Castillon was the first battle to be won solely by firepower, laying the foundation for all subsequent wars on the continent. It showed that technological superiority, even slight, could completely negate the numerical superiority and personal bravery of the enemy. The battle was not just the end of a war, it was the end of an era. We can see that the Battle of Castillon was not just the final chord of the 100 Years' War, but a turning point when history, driven by technology, ruthlessly consigned knightly valor to the archives. On that day, July 20th, 1453, gunpowder and engineering genius won a crushing victory over centuries-old traditions and personal bravery. Jean Bureau's victory proved that winning in the new era required not only courage, but also calculation, logistics, and most importantly, a willingness to abandon outdated rules. Castillon became the place where the Middle Ages were buried, and on its ruins, the construction of the world we know began. Which of the two figures in this battle do you think is more important to history? John Talbot, as a symbol of a valiant but fading past, or John Bureau, as a cool-headed and nameless harbinger of a technological future? Share your opinion in the comments. We greatly appreciate your participation and encourage you to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on other historical research and see how technology has changed the world.